County and Regional Transportation System surtax to be placed on the referendum in November. We have provided to you, pardon me, an ordinance that includes language, and I recommend that you consider that language in conjunction with the other two options that we have provided to you late yesterday afternoon. I've got extra copies if anyone didn't bring theirs with them. Just as a preliminary matter, let me note that the requirements for this language, one is that there be a title, and that title reflect the essentially the way in which it would be commonly be discussed. And the summary is required to provide a clear and unambiguous explanation of the chief purpose of the measure. That's the statutory requirement that we have to meet for any language that we put on the ballot. So this ordinance does a number of things. First and foremost, it directs the placement of the ballot question, however it is ultimately decided to be, to place that on the ballot for referendum approval. And the important thing at this stage is to note that this is authority to advertise and a point of entry for the board to engage in the discussion on the language that we have provided, or other language you may want to consider. First, let me spend a minute and explain some of the biases that at the staff level we worked our way through in developing the language that we have. We did take a conservative approach to ensure compliance with those statutory requirements.
Excuse me, can you speak up, please?
Sorry, is this a little better?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We also had a bias toward using a language that was successful in the past, especially if we have used for criminals. So the language that we have prepared for you is a very close presentation to what has been successful in the past. First and foremost, we did what I would call front end the chief purpose in the language that we have, which is option number one. And that is, within 5 words, we mention levy of the countywide tax. And that is, that obviously is the chief purposes of referendum approval of the levy of the tax. Without opining on the legality of any other options that are out there, the language that staff, like I said, gets to the issue right away. The PSTA language, which is option number 3, waits a considerable period of time before the use of the term levy, some 36 words before we get there. But it is patterned after the Hillsborough ordinance in the sense that I believe that it utilized and front-ended the uses. So we have essentially 2 approaches for you to consider. There are details that we can work out, but the first question I think that we need to talk about is the front-ending of the levy or the front end of the uses. Those are the 2 distinguishing characteristics between the language that's been provided. Obviously, your focus is whether there's a clear and unambiguous explanation of the chief purpose. There are other details that we can get to with respect to that, and I'll answer any questions that you may have about the language that you've provided. But I think that is the first distinguishing characteristics between the models that we've presented. And I just wanted to maybe consider that as the point of departure for the board's discussion, is that issue.
And on the, gotcha, Commissioner.
Thank you.
On the timeline, today we're setting the public hearing, and you also want direction on
The language,
the
and
title
some
language,
provisions that are in the ordinance itself.
Okay.
and those are enumerated in my memo. We can get to the ordinance issues a little later on if you wish to tackle the language
For
first.
the language is finalized when?
The language will be finalized, well, for purposes of the ordinance, the language will be finalized on December 10th,
Okay.
when we have a public hearing on the ordinance.
Okay.
You can change, and you don't have to put the item on the agenda until, on the ballot until sometime in August. But obviously, we want to get this as final as we can possibly do. Let me state that first that the clear and unambiguous language reference is to what the summary has to provide. The title cannot serve as a substitute for what the summary has to do. They can be read together.
Okay. I'll note we also have several speakers, so if we could, as we normally do, ask questions for clarification now, and then we'll hear from the speakers, and then we'll decide on the path forward as a commission. Commissioner Roach?
I just have to get one question on it. Was the, what was the date of when this actually has to be the supervisor of elections?
It doesn't
I mean,
have,
following all the, you know, of course, the necessary and required public hearings, when does the supervisor of elections, what is the deadline for having this to her so it can be on the ballot?
she needs the language in August.
August of next year?
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Roach. Commissioner Long?
Well, I guess maybe Jim just answered this, but in regard to the conversation that I had with him yesterday, I don't understand why the title, which is very specific about the levy of a 1% sales tax, can't suffice for starting off with the summary, telling our citizens what it is we're going to use that money for.
It cannot substitute for the requirement.
Well,
But it certainly amplifies right up front the issue. And there is no order of presentation obligation. It's the question about, on balance, does this clearly and unambiguously provide the chief purpose, the purposes of clearly informing an electorate what they're voting for. And so, yes, having a clear reference to the sales surtax in the title is important. But by the same token, you just have to have a level of comfort with whatever the summary says that you've accomplished the statutory goal.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. Your staff and PSTA's legal staff has met several times, Jim.
Sure.
And option 2 is it reflective of those conversations and your conversations with the commission?
It is. I think PSTA, and I'm sure you'll hear from them, would still prefer to have the language that they have proposed with the uses front-loaded. And
Well, I have a specific question about something that's in that, and I agree with Commissioner Long, and I'll share it with you. I prefer to have the uses first, what the community will receive, and then later in the paragraph talk about the surtax. I mean, this is all within 65 words. It's pretty
exactly. Actually 75, but they go fast.
They do. My question is, there's a line that says, will be deposited in a dedicated trust fund. What is the significance of that? Does that add to clarity, or why is that in the PSTA version?
Let me walk you through that and a couple of other items as well, just to highlight the changes that we have made in our discussions with PSTA. PSTA pointed out to us, and I tend to agree, that there is an apparent obligation to make reference to the trust fund in the summary itself.
Okay.
And so we have tried in option 2 to try to fold it in there so that it is as least disruptive as possible. So that change came directly out of our discussions with PSTA. Also coming out of our discussions with PSTA and with our outside counsel, we removed the or reduced language. The reason for that is that we do not think that the referendum process, standing alone, a single referendum would authorize the board to reduce it. So we're going to take that reference out of there. And the rest of the changes that you see grammatic changes until you get down to the bottom, where PSTA wanted to substitute local passenger rail for future passenger rail. The language that you see in the yes or no is kind of a compromise between PSTA's position and our position. We have always used as a matter of clarity the for and against language to make it clear what yes means and what no means. You heard that comment in our hearing last month. The statute appears to require the words yes and no. And so we wanted to satisfy the statutory requirement by saying yes pursuant to the statute, but going on to say what yes means and no and what no means. So that is a compromise position between the county and PSTA. But I'm sure you will hear from PSTA representatives about their desire to stick with a version of their language. Let me point out that we are seeking direction from you. We will take the direction that you give us, sit down at the table with PSTA and pound out an appropriate set of language to bring back to you based on the guidance you give us.
Well, and we appreciate all the work. Y'all, these are very close in my eyes. I'm not an attorney, but these seem to be very close. Any other questions, comments, Commissioner Seal?
So, when we had previously talked about it, you were fairly comfortable with using the or reduce, but you...
What I said was we would like to be able to have or reduced because of the uncertainties that are out there. But upon further reflection, research, and work with outside counsel representing PSTA and the county, we have come to the point where we think that the or reduced language is problematic.
I am disappointed because I don't think that this would happen, but let's say 35 years from now, the bonds are paid off for the rail. You know, we're actually, operating and maintaining the bus systems and the rail systems, and we have excess money. And then maybe a future commission decides that they have to repeal it and then replace it. There's no ad valorem tax money. Let's say worst case scenario, it all gets turned down, and then PSTA is scrambling for funding. I mean, that's my fear. I don't think it's a believable or realizable fear, but it's a what if.
Well,
it's that future commission, our actions can influence.
We talked about, okay, how would you accommodate that concern? And as cumbersome as it may seem, you would prepare a referendum item to say if you needed $0.5 million instead of $1 million going forward 30 years from now, you would ask the electorate to levy $0.5 million to replace the mill. Obviously it would be clearer, but the idea is you would have to go back to referendum to cut back. We did feel like there would be some authority to repeal, but that's still a little bit of an open question. We feel more comfortable about setting a term until repeal.
And then my other question is the improving, operating, maintaining, and financing. Is that, from what you said, that's consistent with what we put in the penny language?
Well, no, I mean, these are, remember, the penny is a capital infrastructure thing. So we don't have a maintaining, obviously financing is available under the penny language. But this language is tailored for this specific tax.
I guess what I was puzzled about was I would have thought build or construct should be in there so it was clear that, we are going to do something tangible. So maybe improving, constructing, or building, one of the two. Just so it's nice to say improve, but some people may not understand exactly what we're going to do. I think they will by that point, but...
We're into discussion.
We are still in the questions for clarity, and we're going to hear from the public.
I was going to answer the question.
Yes, sir.
Dennis Long, County Attorney's Office. This is the original language here,
Right.
and we were comfortable with the plan development to construct. However, PSA pointed out that equipping is also permitted, and they were more comfortable with the improved language. So that's why, if you take the county staff version with the PSTA revisions, it was changed to improving, operating, maintaining, and financing. We eliminated plan development, construct because of the issue of equipping facilities. So improved was viewed from the PSDA's perspective as more expansive and covered other capital expenditures, including equipping, buying equipment, and so that's why we made the change.
Well, we can ask whether they've had any objections to putting in, either constructing or building. Adding it, not
Sure.
doing anything else.
The last one you make.
Remember, the goal here is to provide clarity. More words to a point provide clarity, and past a point begin to obscure in a sentence like a balance.
Commissioner Lavelle?
Thank you. I think because of the title, it reads much more clearly to the public on option 3. You're saying you're going to levy a tax, then what for, and then you go back and restate it. So I think that makes much more sense than saying it twice in a row and then defining it. So it reads, because everyone who goes to read it is going to start at the top of it. Read the title first, one of the third. But I think it reads much more clearly on option 3.
Thank you, Commissioner Lavelle. Commissioner Roach?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask a question on this that will be deposited into a dedicated trust fund. A dedicated trust fund. You saying you found that was required, or PSTA found that required? Is that required by law?
Yes, it's required by the law that authorizes this tax.
And did we require that in the existing penny for Pinellas?
I don't know whether that, we do put it in a trust fund, but I'm not so sure whether the language is in that particular subsection of the surtax language. Dennis will probably give me an answer in that in a minute.
The statute that authorizes the Charter County and Regional Transportation System surtax has specific language that requires it. It does not under the infrastructure surtax, although we do deposit it into a trust fund.
So the statute has it, but I'm talking about the summary on the ballot.
Well, there's language
requires
in
this on the summary of the ballot language, and we're comparing this to the penny for Pinellas. The penny for Pinellas has a requirement, which you're telling me, PSDA says it's required by them, but this is a county tax. We'll talk about the authority of legal here in a minute. But if it was required here, and we're comparing them, saying it wasn't then, is there a new legislative action that said this is now required? Or is this routine?
No, sir, but the language in the statutory provisions are different. What it says in the transportation system surtax is that the issue shall be placed on the ballot, and that, let's see, what it says is that the proposal to adopt a discretionary sales surtax is provided in subsection, and to create a trust fund within the county accounts shall be placed on the ballot in accordance with law. So
it's required within the ordinance and not necessarily within some other language.
Correct.
It has to be in the summary.
well, you're limited to 15 words in the summary also, so.
Or the title.
Or
In the title, 15 years.
15, I'm sorry.
No, I'm in the summary.
Okay. So I'm sorry,
The
Commissioner.
question is it required by law to be in the summary or in the ordinance?
Well, We have a difference of opinion with the PSTA legal counsel on that.
Okay, that's what I asked, was an opinion. That's what I was trying to
But-
get to the law. That's
But,
what I'm trying to- Okay.
the bottom line is that we had sufficient capacity in words to add it, and the PSTA staff felt more comfortable if it was in there, so that's why.
It was,
That's why we
trying to
created it.
clarify whether it was all, so it was a compromise. We had some room, we put it in there, but check.
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's what we're getting
So that is in option 2 and and
That's
3.
in 2 and 3.
Yes.
Which is counterintuitive to how I operate.
So that's all. All right, so we're not discussing the particulars of the data or whatever, we're going to get public comment and get into it, because I offered some ideas too. That's
Exactly.
Right, okay.
Okay.
All right, thank
Any
you.
other questions at this point? Thank you, Commissioner Roach. We'll hear from the public. First, Brad Miller, Alan Zimmett, and Dwayne Draper. 3 on 1 card.
Good afternoon. Since you're talking about the ballot question, I'll have Alan
Okay.
just kind of respond to some of the questions and comments.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
I did fill out my own cards, you don't.
I do have that as well, yeah.
Just some comments on the issues that you've been discussing. And PSA does prefer the, what I believe is your option number 3, which is the one we drafted. And so we would request that that would be the direction that you give staff to improve the ballot language as to option 3. Mr. Bennett is correct, the statute does provide that we have to state the substantial purpose and in clear language for the voters. In this case, we got to tell them 2 things. One, the levy of the tax, and also the purposes for use of the tax. So the purpose has to cover both things. And we believe our language does that. Commissioner Ballot brought up the point that when you read with the title, it does, we think, flow better. We think it conveys the message better. And for that reason, we do prefer that option, which is option 3 in your packet. The other thing, just some other comments I wanted to mention, and it addresses in the ordinance as well as the county staff's proposed language with regard to the appeal by county ordinance. We do have concern about that. I have not found any, and I don't believe the county staff has found any specific case law or Attorney General's opinions that say that you can or cannot repeal it by ordinance. But we do have concern that that places risk because this is something being approved by the voters at a referendum. And so we believe there might be a legal requirement that only by referendum can the tax be repealed. In any event, I think it seems logical that if the voters are going to approve the referendum, approve the tax, then they'd be the ones that say it should be reduced or should be repealed. It is, and Mr. Draper and I think Mr. Miller are going to address some concerns it raises for PSTA in terms of bonding capacity and also what PSTA may do with regard to its ad valorem taxes if the county commission has the ability to repeal the tax by ordinance. Or even the same goes for if it can be reduced by ordinance. As you're aware, the PSA board has voted and directed staff to pursue the legislation to repeal its authority to issue ad valorem taxing, to impose ad valorem taxes based upon referendum approval of the surtax. And there would be some concern if they give up that taxing authority, as Commissioner Seal recognized, if the county commission, however many years later, can then repeal the surtax, because then PSA would be left without any taxing authority. I did also want to emphasize the language, while we look at the language on the thing for Pinellas, where we are operating under a separate statute. This is a different section of the same statute, but a different section. The language is different. There is specific language in there, for example, which indicates that we think the reference to the putting money in the trust fund, which will be held by the clerk of the court, is required in the ballot language. That's why we suggested that that be added. So while we look at what was done with the penny for Pinellas, that doesn't control the language in the statute. It's much different, because we're talking about totally different sections of the statute. So for those reasons, we are going, PSA is requesting that you direct county staff to include option 3 in terms of the ballot language. I know Mr. Miller and Mr. Draper want to address some other issues with the ordinance.
Can you speak to Commissioner Seal's question about adding the word construction, perhaps after improvement?
Right, and I don't think we have a problem with adding the word construct in there. Our concern was before was as, that without the word improving, are we going to have to address every specific potential use, like equipping, and everything that might be done and construct doesn't really contemplate buying buses. So we were looking for a little bit better language that encompassed not only the construction, but also the equipping of the
But
system.
you don't have an issue with that?
But we don't have an issue with adding it, as long as we leave the word approved in that.
The word would be construction based on the
Right.
text. Did you have an issue with the addition of, after yes and no, yes, comma, for the 1%, no, comma, against the 1%?
I don't think we have an issue. Again, the statute, the one statute does seem to indicate we have to follow the question with yes or no
Well, I think
in this
that does
situation. So
clarify.
I think we've compromised to
Okay.
this to meet that statutory requirement. So I don't think we have a problem with that.
Any other questions for Mr. Zimmer? Commissioner Roach?
This might be for either one of them, I'm not sure. Is there anything in that, in the law requirements that dictate placement within the language of purpose relative to percentage of allocation? Do you follow?
No.
Is there
I follow
is there
the answers, no.
superior? Yeah, there's no, okay, so there's nothing in there that
No,
says
there's generally,
the
we are
superior
required
use
to.
doesn't have to sit here or here, or nothing like that.
No, but we do have to tell the voter generally what the money's going to be used for.
And one just clarification, one thing I talked, there was a question about it last night, and somewhere speaking, because at the last meeting I had mentioned something about, and you kind of talked about it briefly earlier, about it was illegal for Pinellas County to run a bus system, right? Remember that conversation?
I believe that under your charter with the existence of PSTA, you don't have the authority to run a transit system.
So you would require a charter change or some legislative amendment too?
Well, we disagree.
I think we disagree on that. But we believe it would require the county to have a charter change to essentially run a transit system competing with PSTA.
PSTA didn't exist.
I haven't looked at it, PSTA didn't exist. I mean.
No, I'm not really trying to, I'm trying to find out, I'm
PSTA
trying to
didn't
clarify the statement so that I didn't misspeak to anyone, because it would be illegal for us to do it if we did it illegally.
If you yourself operate a transit, I believe it would be inconsistent with PSTA Special Act. And
There's no legislative or law that says it would be illegal for us to operate a busing system, other than a discussion over a charter. No, there's some legislation.
Correct,
Right.
that statement's correct.
I just want to make sure that the statement
And
wasn't, I've clarified, make sure I didn't make an incorrect statement.
one other thing I want to clarify, and I guess in response also to something Commissioner Seal said, if there was money left over, the interlocal agreement could provide that the county could provide that money to other transit providers, for example, to BARDA, or in 35 years, there may be some other transit provider that they could provide money to. They could, through the interlocal agreement, provide a methodology for that to occur in 35 years. You know, as long as, Mr. Draper may address this a little bit, but as long as there's protection for the bonds, any bonds or obligations that PSTA is outstanding in which the surtax has been pledged as security.
Anything else, Commissioner Roach?
That's going to be it for now. Thank you, sir.
Any other questions for Mr. Zimmer? Okay, Mr. Draper?
Thank you.
Thank you.
While Mr. Draper comes up, I'm trying to anticipate what he's going to talk about, and this would, I would explain again, another one of our biases that we have in drafting, and that is that on page 3 of the, no, not page 3, where's the provision about? Okay, on page 4, subsection C, it says the issuance of bonds or other indebtedness pledging the surtax proceeds shall be subject to the approval of the board. That language was placed in there essentially as a matter that's consistent with the board, with what the board has always done with respect to giving someone else the ability to bond its the proceeds from its tax dollars, just as we do in the tax increment financing arena. We felt like we should put that in there.
Can you give us that section again?
That is on page 4, subsection C. And that would basically say when PSTA is ready to bond this revenue stream, they would bring it to the board for approval. And there's all sorts of ideas on how to approach the bonding, and I'm sure Mr. Draper's going to discuss that, but I wanted to at least get out on the table why we put that in there in the first place. It's consistent with what the board has done in the past.
And there's disagreement on that?
What's that?
And there's disagreement?
I believe there may be, yeah.
Okay.
Steps.
Great. I'm not sure there is in totality, but perhaps a subtle clarification I'd like to make. My name is Dwayne Draper, and I'm before you, law partners with Alan, and before you in capacity as bond counsel to PSTA. And I guess one thing that he alluded to that I want to reference, and then I'll move on to this issue, and those will be the only two items I'll address, is that the PSTA has no issue with the concept of until repealed by referendum, or until repealed and to stay silent. The concern that PSTA has with regard to until repealed by county ordinance is that it just, according to E&Y, who is the financial consultant for PSTA, it adds a potential bondholder, a risk or some hair that may potentially result in a higher cost of funds and therefore ultimately a lower deposit to the ultimate project fund. And that's the concern. There's somewhat of a symmetry to requiring the same method of putting the tax in place in the first instance in terms of repealing it. In both cases, leaving that to the voters of Pinellas County. With regard to the point that Jim raised, PSTA is fine with the county having a one-time upfront, for lack of a better term, omnibus consent by the county commission to the bond indenture that would allow PSTA to execute its finance plan in a reasonable manner. We understand that the county has an interest in making sure that the surtax is appropriately leveraged, and we are committed to making the county comfortable in that regard. However, as we discussed with Jim and Dennis, it's important that the consent not be tied to a particular dollar amount of debt, given the nature of the surtax, as it will continue until and if repealed. And that could be the debt is incurred 30, 40, 50 years down the road. As that debt's incurred, other debt will mature and will be coming off the books. And so the amount of debt that gets issued will go up and up and up. Now, that's not to suggest that the amount of outstanding debt at any one time will always continue to go up, up, up. So it's important to note that PSTA does not have an infinite ability to issue debt. It has finite bonding capacity. Under the, it is only limited to being able to bond what the 1% tax yields. And that's really a net figure because whatever PSTA builds pursuant to the plan and the referendum, it must operate and maintain. So it's really the leftovers, which is bondable. And further, there will be bond covenants, I'm sure, that will be necessary in order to obtain investment grade rating and optimal cost of funds by the rating agencies. For example, debt tests in the bond covenants, which is some of the types of particulars I think the county staff is appropriately interested in as we develop this. So our intent is to start drafting that bond indenture once the referendum language is set, the ordinance is finished, and the interlocal agreement is set. The next item on the agenda later this year or very early next year is to get a bond indenture in place first that county staff is comfortable with, and ultimately it would come back for one-time approval to the county commission. And that's kind of the idea that we have with regard to the provision of the ordinance that Jim pointed out.
And what's the time frame for that one-time approval? When do you see that approximately?
I think it would be no later than, in our mind, no later than a couple of weeks after the referendum vote occurs. It could come back sooner. It's really more of a strategic decision as to when you want that item to come back up, but it wouldn't have to happen prior to, very soon after the referendum is put in place, although we could bring it back sooner if that's the preference of the county.
After the November 4th vote?
That's correct. Okay. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fair. I appreciate that. In the context of this discussion, this particular surtax, additional surtax, who in your view is the taxing authority in this discussion?
The tax will be imposed by Pinellas County.
Okay, so the county would be the taxing authority regarding this. Okay, who would then be, in your opinion, the rated entity for the bond, thus guaranteeing through their tax?
The rating would be provided to bonds that would be issued by Pinellas Suncoast Transit Authority. That credit analysis would be based upon the interlocal agreement between PSTA and the county, whereby the surtax comes to
Guarantees
it.
it, right. So it would be fair to say that the county would be the rating authority. It's based on what the county is able to connect through its collection, not necessarily what PSTA is. There's no taxing authority.
There'll be no other county
We're the ones guaranteeing.
backup, but I would say that the rating agencies will be viewing the strength of the interlocal, the strength of the referendum language only. If they're not going to be concerned about the financial health of the county, because the county will not be providing any secondary source of security to this. So it will be strictly based upon PSTA's financial viability and the strength of this interlocal agreement and the tax.
But going back around there, the taxing authority, PSTA's financial viability is, in effect, I'm guessing, you can correct me on this, I don't have to be the expert, is based on their taxing authority and ability guarantee.
But it will be limited, the county's only obligation here will be to, when the surtax comes down from the Department of Revenue to the clerk, it's deposited in the dedicated trust fund, it will then be sent pursuant to the local agreement to PSTA. That's the county's only obligation.
Right, that's the connector, the interlocal.
Yeah, that's the county's only obligation, so the county will not have any backup credit support, therefore, that's the limit of the financial analysis, that plus PSTA's financial viability as an operating enterprise.
But without it, okay, fair enough. Thank you, answered my question. Thank you, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowe.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We do have a couple other speakers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next speaker is Tim Haberlin.
Mr. Chair, could I just say a few summary things? Or are you gonna call me?
Yeah, why don't you come forward and then Ms. Haberlin, you come up and,
Sorry. Apologize about that.
that's okay.
So just sort of in the summary to the four items on Mr. Bennett's memo, you heard from Alan about the PSDA and the reasons why we would recommend the ordinance language under option 3. The second item on your list is about including language that would have a trigger in some way that if the rail grants were not timely forthcoming, and we would be, at least our position is, we would be opposed to including that language in the ordinance. I have a memo, which I have copies here, that I drafted, that I passed out at the Nelson PO and at the PSPA committees, that speaks to at least the research that I've done on the viability of our financial plan with Ernst & Young and the conservative assumptions we've done on the availability of federal funds, and it just remains a fact that the federal government has never turned down a successful voter-initiated referendum, a project supported by that referendum. They have not done that ever. And their program is not to even do that. What they give you a rating, and they've never given a low rating to something that is funded by a dedicated funding source like we're talking about here. So the odds of us never getting federal support are very, very limited. They never happened before. But even in that case, we've done this financial analysis, we've taken even more conservative assumptions on the federal funds. And then, of course, we have the PSTA board, which has 4 county commissioners that will cross that bridge when we get there, whatever that may be. We will constantly adjust our plan over time, I'm sure, and new technologies might come about, but we would be able to handle that. And I don't know if that's necessarily something that has a time trigger or exactly what. So I can provide that memo.
Mr. Chairman, I can follow up, just to direct your attention to the language in the ordinance that I believe he's referring to. There may be a whereas clause, but there is on page 3, that talks about, in the event the required state or federal funding necessary to implement the plan in its totality is not timely received. And then it goes on to talk about reducing, the tax by ordinance. We've already said that is going to come off the table. In terms of, and so the real question is whether we keep the by ordinance repeal. And I believe the language that PSTA wants in the repeal language is just say until repealed without any reference to how it was done. So I think it's section C that he's referring to there. So the question is whether we want to keep the concept in about unnecessary funds, insufficient funds coming forward, and talk about repeal. I would not want to talk about reducing since we've taken that off the table. So that's the section he's talking about.
Yeah, okay. All right.
The third item, Mr. Draper responded to about the ability for the county to approve the bonds before issued. And number 4 is that issue of the county ordinance being able to reduce or repeal, which of course we think has serious consequences if the county has an ability to do that, with us to issue bonds. So, summary recommends.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Heberlin?
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time, and I get to follow Brad Miller, which I really appreciate his energy in this project. My name is Tim Heberlein. I'm with the Florida Consumer Action Network. We're a membership-based advocacy organization focused on environmental, economic, and social justice. And the issue of transportation is really important to our members, and our members go out and vote, and they do care about this issue. I just want to thank the body for its leadership on this important regional economic engine. FCAN is actually proud to be a community member of the Greenlight Pinellas project in getting the word out to the community and to provide a great solution to one of the most pressing issues in our region. I applaud the efforts into Greenlight, through the Greenlight process, and bringing as many people as it has from such diverse communities, and presenting a plan that's you feel has done its due diligence in estimating costs and providing a fair and informed product to the community. As far as the language presented, we support the most expansive language possible that allows for growth to meet the continual growing needs of the community, and excluding any language that would prevent or impede the ability for Greenlight or for the transit plan to connect to potential other transportation improvements in the region. That includes to the surrounding counties and as well as the proposed Howard Franklin transit envelope. We do share the PSTA's concerns about potential appeal through ordinance, just the language presented in options 1 and 2. We do support, we share those concerns. We support a referendum, this referendum by the people, should it pass, that the county commission respects that will and the voice of the people, respect the voice of the people, and that should not include a language that would create some uncertainty in the bonding process. So what I have before me actually is our members. We have 94 pages, 10 signatures each. Just over 900 of our members that we've talked to that support the Greenlight plan. We are actually going door to door this week to ramp up our efforts next week to let people know, should this go through when the commission puts this on the ballot, that we are supporting it very actively, and we want to make sure that we're not going to rest until the issue of transportation is resolved and to our satisfaction. So.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You want to hand those to the clerk?
Actually, these have to be entered yet. We just pulled these out this last week. So once we do, we'll be submitting the names.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thank you. And the last speaker I have is Katie Franco.
Good afternoon. I'm Katie Franco. I'm here on behalf of the Tampa Bay Partnership. So we're the 8 County Economic Development Organization, and our members continually tell us year after year transportation is the top priority for growing our economy here in Tampa Bay. I just wanted to step up and thank you all for your leadership on this issue. We're really excited about where this is going. We're extremely supportive of everything you're doing today. We do want to echo what Brad Miller and some of his team has said, that we spent some time with his Ernst & Young folks that were in town. We're very impressed with the depth of work PSTA did with Ernst & Young. And one of the big things our members took away from that was the importance of bonding and having the right language and the right ability. So I thank you for considering that issue and urge you to go ahead and make sure that we do have an ability to do what PSTA needs to do with that money and maximize our potential. We also do support the PSTA language. We like the fact that you sell the product before you put the amount after. We always like to provide our products, make sure we want it first before we find out how much it costs. So we support that, and again, urge you to stay on time and keep this process moving. The region, you really are leading the entire region on this, and we applaud you every step of the way.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it. Did anyone else wish to speak on this issue? Okay. Well, board, let's pick some ballot language here. We also want to give Commissioner Roach an opportunity to talk about his proposed. Well, I wasn't going to, but well, I've got some comments.
Okay. And make comments.
I want to thank our staff and PSTA staff and everyone who's been involved, but particularly the attorneys who've been working on this. I think these are very close, and now it's a matter of presentation. I agree, and I believe that option 3 lays it out in correct format. There's agreement on the title. I don't want to wordsmith this, but is there a reason it doesn't say to fund B, Green Light Pinellas Plan? THE, B, Green Light Pinellas Plan?
16 words.
16 words, okay.
There you go.
All righty.
Economy.
Does that apply to the legislature too?
No.
Okay, so that's why these not there. I would agree with adding the word construction after improvement. Shall the improvement, comma, construction, comma, operation. I am concerned about the option to reduce, which I think there's agreement that shouldn't be in there. But I think having it say simply until repealed is the right approach. And I think the voters should, if one day they want to repeal it, the voters should do that. I'm kind of more optimistic when we get 30 years down the road. Folks will be talking about, I'm next, and here's phase 2 going to Pasco for the next high growth area. And I on the last part of it, I think yes for the 1% and no against the 1% has more clarity to it than just yes and no. So those are my thoughts on it. Commissioner Ballot?
Thank you. And I concur with your thoughts on option 3. It just reads more smoothly. You start out with what it is that's being proposed, and then it's defined in the summary. I am fine with adding the language after the yes and the no. I think that does bring some more clarity to it. And just a personal comment, it is really an honor and a pleasure to be involved in this. This is something that it's a legacy issue
It is.
for our county, and I'm really honored to be a part of it. We've sat through the last 3 years, I think, at PSTA, as we've gotten this off the ground and seeing how the momentum has grown. It's really exciting. And I'm really pleased that we're at this point today. Look forward to November 14th.
Been a long road.
It has.
Commissioner Long?
Yes, I would just like to echo profoundly the words of our chairman and Commissioner Latvala, and just tell you that I am so proud to be sitting here today, moving this forward on behalf of our county and our region, and all of our citizens who will come to rely on this. It's going to truly make us competitive, both economically and culturally, and I'm just absolutely thrilled. I couldn't be more happy, so. And I'm proud of all of our leadership as a team. It's just, it says an awful lot about where this county is going. So, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Long. And again, today we're giving direction to our council, and they will come back with language on the 3rd. Is it 3rd or the 10th? 3rd is the work
The
session.
10th. But we can certainly discuss it at the 10th.
Oh, at
I
the
think
3rd.
there was talk about discussing the final language at the 10th.
Yeah, 3rd is the work session. Okay. The only other thing before I turn it over to Commissioner Roach for his proposal is on that section 2C that we were looking at. My thought is you would eliminate everything in that and just leave the last sentence that says the surtax may be repealed by referendum. The rest of it talks about reducing, and is that where you were headed with that?
I believe so.
Okay. So,
The only other outstanding question that we needed some guidance on was the language about board approval of bonding. And PSA seemed to think they didn't have a problem as long as we fleshed out maybe in the interlocal agreement how that bonding was going to be brought forward. And we'll enter into those discussions.
well, what Mr. Draker laid out made sense if it's a one-time and early in the process, but I don't think we want to be approving bonds. Right. And continually.
Yeah.
There has to be some certainty.
And then perhaps we can reach the point where we have in the interlocal agreement discussion about how that one-time, what that one-time thing will encompass. So we can add some reference to the interlocal agreement under C
Okay.
on page 4.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on the ballot language? Okay, Commissioner Roach, you sent us some proposed language yesterday or this morning.
Yes.
We got hard copies. You want to go over that?
I don't usually endeavor exercises in futility, but I will on this. I too am proud that out of 363 metro areas in the country, our metro area ranks 16th and fastest growing right now without a rep. So we are very competitive. I'm proud that we are still competitive and do not need this to be competitive. It's not an affront to it, it's just a statement of fact. That came out yesterday, by the way. I have a lot of concerns with it. I'd like to talk about because I think this is an extremely important endeavor. This is extremely huge for this county. And I'm calmed by the fact that we actually are many months ahead of when this actually has a deadline on it. So the sense of urgency that's been created to do this today or within the next month, I think it's good that we could take a breath and realize that we do not have to do this today, and it does not have to be done within the next month. We have until August of 2014 to hash out a lot of questions that have yet to be answered, and for my comfort level, I don't think that prevents this from going forward. I think that everybody can see that. But I had a lot of concerns with, number one, some of the languages in it. Number one, the use of Green Light Pinellas. Green Light Pinellas is not the plan. Green Light Pinellas was a brand name that a consultant was paid to come up with. The plan is the alternative analysis, the entire financial structure that this has been put together on comes from the alternative analysis. That plan does not include the bikes or the walking trails that are in the Green Light Pinellas logo. So I'm going to base all this, comes from a couple very key points. Number one, is the gentleman who stood before us at our last meeting, I think you referenced it earlier, about wasn't sure whether he was for or against it, but wanted us to be very clear on the ballot language, and so that citizens know exactly what it is we're doing, that yes doesn't mean no, and voting for this doesn't mean that, and that sort of thing. And one of my biggest concerns, and I've aired it to BSDA in here, is the lack of a plan B. But starting with that, with respect to what seems to be, at least that I'm gauging here, option 3 language here, the concern is the Green Light Pinellas plan. And again, Green Light Pinellas isn't a plan, it's a branding name. It's what we've been selling as the branding name, but that's not really the plan. The plan is the alternative analysis, and I have concerns with us spending $500,000 to market the brand of Green Light Pinellas and then trying to put it on a ballot to pass it as the plan. The dollars and cents in this entire project and this entire 1 cent initiative comes from the alternative analysis, and that was a $4 million plan that was created, done, and approved, and accepted as quote the plan. So that's number one. The second issue, if you look at the ideas I give you here, or have put out here, the second issue is the use, and this again goes back towards the gentleman's comment about being very clear on what it is. And that is the words and the semantics played here on how we're sort of conflating the word 1 cent and 1% here in this, because in earnest, what we are not doing is levying a 1% sales tax as if it is a standalone. People will not buy something in the county and on their receipt see 7-cent sales tax and a standalone 1 cent. In earnest, this is an addition to the existing sales tax that we have. And if we use the word percent in that context, it is a 14.28% increase in the existing sales tax, not a standalone separate 1%. To use the 1, you have to go to 1 cent, and that's 1 cent added to the existing 7-cent sales tax. So that is the word conflation there that is concerning to me. This would imply that we are just the only thing we have. The only tax we have, it's a standalone. The word addition should be in there, but if you go to addition, then you have to address the percentage versus cent issue, and that's my concerns there, which is why I kind of added some of this in there. The second idea in some of this was to simply scratch and this would make it really simpler in the language, in my opinion, is scratch the reference to the Green Light Plan, which is what we have been marketing for a year on, and simply make it a transit plan. Because the Green Light, this is alternative analysis, this and this and this. It's not the Green Light. The Green Light logo and the dollar structure that is in this plan is predicated on the alternative analysis. And the alternative analysis did not include lights and walking trails and all that. So that's important. Plus that just opens it up for growth and potential, and it doesn't lock us into one thing if you're going to do it. Now, the problem also for me is with the constant reference to regional. This is, I do not want to encumber Pinellas County taxpayers to fund regional systems. And in the language of the actual ordinance, it's even specifically the Charter County and Regional Transportation System surtax. It doesn't even mention connectors in the title of that, but in the other language it's mentioning connectors. If Pinellas does this and Hillsborough does this, and then at some point we want the two communities to get together and decide who will fund and how they will fund the connectors, that's one thing. But to encumber us for the regional connection funding of that, when a regional system doesn't even exist, I think is problematic for that. So, and I believe every bit of this should be predicated on the successful repeal of the existing PSTA tax. That is key to me. We are, in effect, doing dual taxation if this passes, because you still have an interlocal agreement, the existing in the BOCC at all, you've got it existing. And in our finance subcommittee, we were talking about that on how, well, if PSTA decides at some point in the future to collect or re-up the tax, well then we'll agree to just give it to the county. Well, what does that mean? Other than we get more money to give back to them. So I think that's very clear on this, and that was kind of why I referenced it earlier in the legislative delegation. So what I look for is the first one. I've got several options here, quite frankly, that address some of the things we've been talking about already. You see the marked up version, which I think if you go to the clean version makes it far clearer that we will levy an additional 14.28% sales surtax to fund countywide and regional public transit plans. I'd love to scratch regional out of there completely. And then upon successful legislative repeal of the existing PSD ad valorem, shall Pinellas County levy that additional 14.2% sales tax, starting, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, the associated fors and against. Option, the second or the alternative option is on the second page that I'd like to enter for consideration. does that in the same way. Basically, this goes to the cent issue as opposed to the percent issue, and it's levy an additional 1 cent to the existing countywide surtax of 7 cents to fund, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, the summary upon successful repeal of the existing PSTA ad valorem, and then the associated so far. If you go to county attorney's chart or issues here under number 2, you will see the ordinance provides that the funding capacity of rail is not untimely and what have you. And this goes to Commissioner Seal's concept and the theory and discussion on do we want to be in a position to reduce? Well, all that applies absolutely as well in reverse, which says we don't necessarily have to set it at the high and seek to reduce. We can set it at the low and seek to increase. So that's what this option 2, which quite frankly option 2 here and the option 3 are my two most preferred, option 3 the most preferred fund. And that would be to levy an additional ½ cent to the existing countywide surtax for the funding of the existing and expanded countywide transit. Period, right there. And it allows the flexibility to go there, and should in fact the federal funding come through, and should in fact that all be solidified first, then you go to language. Upon successful legislative repeal of an existing PSTA ad valorem, shall the county levy the additional ½ cents to the existing until repealed or increased by county ordinance to operate, maintain, and finance the bus transit system throughout Pinellas County. And that's the 4. So it's that same theory of if we're comfortable with the concept of being able to repeal or reduce, we should also be comfortable with repeal or increase after we have in fact answered all the questions and the funding has been assured and all that sort of stuff. I mean this with all due respect, but if we've learned anything from the recent Affordable Health Care Act and the Bigger Waters Act, is we need to have questions answered. And we need to read, and we need to make sure these things are done before we vote on certain things, as do our citizens. Now, my biggest concerns I brought through to PSTS, and I've talked about here in terms of the taxing authority. I questioned a little bit about that. Is that we do have a third option. And the third option is to leave the legislative, when I go down the third option here, I think the third option to all this, in terms of us getting involved in this to begin with, and that's leave PSTA's taxing authority in place. Encourage them to keep in control of their taxing authority, retain it, and then encourage them in an effort, and you guys know this because you're on PSTA, to increase their current levy to at least the existing 0.75 mil, and then encourage them to, and support them in their efforts to increase it through proper legislation to a cap of not to exceed 1 mil or 2 or whatever it is, for them to endeavor and take full responsibility and bonding capability for this endeavor, which, as we're all accepting, is there. If we're going to accept this as the taxing authority, then council is absolutely correct, and every bit of piece that we've discussed on taking out of here, we absolutely should not take out of here, because we are the liable taxing authority here. We are the rated ones. We are the ones who will be giving this money away, and we should approve any bonding issues because we are the ones taxing authority and liable for that. We should not remove any of that from here if we're going to go forward as the taxing authority. This removes that authority out of PSTA's hands and places it in us. It would be irresponsible for us to say, we'll just collect the money and be liable for it and just give it to you, do what you want. That's simplifying it, but that's totally outside of our ability, really, in my opinion. So I have that concern. Now, the overriding concern for me, quite frankly, I brought this up, is there is no plan B. There's no plan B in this entire thing. I brought this up to our PSTA, I brought it up here before. Plan B is no new revenue source, which in effect is no plan B. We've been spending the revenues on PSTA. I know we're sitting in different roles here. Down, we're going to spend it right down to this to fund this PSTA operation and spend it right down to this ad valorem tax. And if this tax doesn't pass, crash the system by 28%. That's been reported, that's out there. This isn't out of class. We all know that. They've talked about it. They've said that's what we're going to have to do if we don't get this. And I mean this with the utmost of respect of my colleagues sitting here at this board who are a layer longer than me and on PSTA. That's extremely irresponsible for us to go forward on that mode. For our vote, with our care and all the speeches on how much we care about transportation and expanding it in this county, for our plan B to be, if we don't get it all, crash the system by 28%. Think, the legacy is, think about that. We have no plan B here. What are we going to do if this money doesn't come, if this doesn't pass? That's the plan B issue I've been talking about. There is none. And that to me is crazy. I can't, as a person elected to sit here and fiscal and fiduciary responsibility. Move forward with a plan that says if I don't get it all, I'm crashing the system by 28% to 30%. That's concerning.
Commissioner, let me ask you to
Now,
come back to the ballot language so we can.
okay.
get
All right, I just want to give you the
over
overall guidance on this.
Okay.
Hopefully, down the road, we can have this isn't something that has to be decided today, but coming down the road, when this comes down by August, these are issues that I'm going to be talking about as my independently elected, independently accountable seat sitting here as a representative of citizens in this county. With fiscal and fiduciary. Okay, now I've dispatched, you guys may or may not know, a letter to our, this is the other thing that concerns me. I'm putting them all out here because this is going to be discussed going forward.
Well, I want to just try to bring the ballot language in because we've got other items and then we've got 6 o'clock public hearing. So
Okay.
if you can speak to your ballot language, we can get a motion.
Well,
and-
those are, yeah, I really
Okay.
think that we should consider option 2. I'd be happy to answer any questions or have some debate on what your thoughts are, or keep in mind that it's option 3 of us staying out of this and allowing PSDA to do its job as it is legislatively created to do, is still an option 2. So are there any, does anybody have any questions on the language that I've presented here? Is there anything you disagree with or anything you don't understand?
Well, I have some responses. I would have, first of all, you've been consistent on your positions, and I appreciate it. Probably would have liked to have had this a couple days earlier, but it's no surprise to you, I'm sure, that I disagree with your approach on this. I won't go point for point because I have a feeling you and I are going to be debating this over the next year at several locations. You know, Greenlight Pinellas is not just the AA. It's the AA, it's the community bus plan, which happened after the AA. It's a lot of other things. This does not encumber Pinellas taxpayers for regional projects. It funds Pinellas County's bus system and the light rail system. The partnerships are important, like FDOT coming forward and saying they'll put the infrastructure in for a crossing on the New Highway Franklin. Those are important. But this doesn't encumber Pinellas residents for those regional projects. Dual taxation, you know, from day one, PSTA has said we will eliminate the ad valorem. We will follow that up and ask our legislative delegation to eliminate that authority moving forward. And there is a plan B, and it's pretty draconian. But there is a plan B, and PSTA has talked about that for some time. So doesn't surprise you, I'm sure, that I disagree and won't be able to support your ballot language proposal. I would ask, are there any other questions for Commissioner Roach? I would ask if we have a motion, and again, we are setting the public hearing and giving our council direction on which of these options, including Commissioner Roach's option, if we go that way, to include in what they bring back on the 3rd. So, Commissioner Lockwood.
Thank you. I would move approval of the PSTA option 3 with the added language under yes and no, referring to the 1% sales surtax.
And
Second.
the word construction.
Yeah, I'm
After
sorry, yes.
improvement.
Yes, and the word construction.
Oh, wait a minute.
Option 3.
That's option 3, but there's no improving in option 3, unless I got the wrong one. Oh, okay.
Option 3 begins with improvement.
Sorry.
Yeah, first, third word.
Motion was Commissioner Latvala, second was Commissioner Long. Questions, comments? Commissioner Roach?
Would the motioner accept the addition of upon successful legislative repeal of PSTA ad valorem property tax? To leave this in the summary.
Thank you, Commissioner Roach. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Sears?
Just one comment. I'm going to reluctantly support this. I prefer the county attorney's option 2 that had until repealed by county ordinance. And I like the way that language flows better, but that's my opinion.
Thank you, Commissioner.
I think it gives,
Okay.
again, the taxpayers will be looking towards the county commissioners someday in the future to make sure that we've got the proper oversight. I like the dedicated trust fund, but I still think the county commission should have a voice in the surtax.
Okay, There will be 4 county commissioners on the PSGA board.
And you're welcome to do it.
I think we're near a decision on this, so any other questions or comments? We have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Respectfully, Mayor.
Motion passes 5-1. Commissioner Roach dissenting.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Just, can I inquire of our drafters, do we have the guidance we need? I think, my understanding was that we were going to remove some of the language in here about that reference failure of federal funds and, excuse me, and the reduced language, and that we were going to maybe make a reference to interlocal agreement that talked about the board approval of bonding. We're good?
Thank you, Councilman. Appreciate your work on this. Appreciate your work, PSGA. Okay, that takes us to 24B.
24B, Mr. Chairman, we're seeking authority to advertise an ordinance relating to enforcement of the Pinellas County stormwater regulations.
Okay, is there a motion? Is there a second? Questions or comments? All in favor? Opposed? Motion passes. Okay, motion passes 5-1. Commissioner Roach dissenting on 24B.
Mr. Chairman, I think you need to go back to 24A and approve a motion granting authority to advertise.
That was included.
Or that was
I
included?
think it was. That was in the original.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay. County Attorney miscellaneous.
Miscellaneous, we have one item, Mr. Chairman, recommending settlement of fines relating to the Pollution Control Act with the Herbie style plants.